Okay, guys, we are back today with the Coach Trap podcast. This week, me and Dan are very fortunate to be joined by the amazing Marie Donnelly. But before we go into that deep dive, just a reminder, 90% of coaches and online businesses fail. So my question to you is, will you be the 10% that make it? If you want to be the 10%, trust me, click the link below to subscribe and let's have a deep dive to find out all about Marie, how she's made it, and hopefully it can inspire you. So, Marie, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to know a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your business, a little bit more about how you got into this space. What inspired you?
That's a very long-winded question there, Greg. But I suppose for me, I have always been a people person. Coaching sort of fell into my lap more so than me choosing it, if you like. So my background is a social worker in mental health and addictions for over 20 years with adults. And again, I fell into that. I'd done a diploma, didn't know what we were doing. We says we'd all go and do social work. Went and done my social work then. I didn't even know what a social worker was at that point. um, and then from that, it all grew just organically. What happened was my last placement as a social worker was in a rehab. And it scared the life out of me. Scared the life out of me going in because I didn't know what to expect. I genuinely didn't know what to expect. However, when I got there, I loved it. It was amazing. The people were so amazing. Their stories were amazing. And I just really, really connected with them. So from that, then I went into to substance misuse. Excuse me. And then came back to Ireland and still continued on with substance misuse and mental health. And then at one point then I was headhunted then to go and work in the mental health hospital. And I agreed as long as my job was left open for me in addictions. So I was going to try it out for a while. And that gave me the time then to go back and do my coaching because I was able to reduce my hours and I was able to go back and do my life coaching. So it's funny how things work out. If you just believe there's a path for you, I'm a firm believer what's for you will not pass you. So everything for me has just sort of fell in my lap and just in a lovely way. And I'm sure there's so many other people like that in the same sort of circumstances as myself that they really are for the best for helping for people, but they just don't know which way that life will take them.
Absolutely love that. It's fascinating. I find the coaches who are most successful, the ones where it's a skill or a passion, if that makes sense, right? Skill
Yeah.
or passion plus usefulness. It's really interesting, even to hear you talk about it, substance abuse, addiction. Lots of people would run a mile from that, but it's amazing to think that that draws you in, that that inspires you. So, do you see this sort of stuff on the rise? Do you think that, or are things getting better? What's your take on that?
I think that people are becoming more aware of alcohol, but I think there's more people dabbling with drugs. And I think that by the time them drugs get over here as well, they're cut and laced with everything. So even as professionals working in that field, we don't know what's everything is cut with and the dangers of it. And what I find, sorry, quite a lot working with professionals is that a lot of it coincides with their drinking as well. So if they're taking coke, that's usually something that's working alongside when they're drinking. And then that can sometimes snowball just to actually when they start taking lines during the week and that as well when they're not drinking. And it's very, very hidden because the higher up that you climb, the harder it is for you to say that you need help. And it's not just with drugs or alcohol that I work with, because for me to be able to build a rapport is I work more with the mental wealth side because it's difficult to go into people and ask them to spill their heart out to me in around substance misuse. So that's not usually my starting point with them unless they specifically seek me out for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes real sense. It's really interesting about you saying it being hidden. And that draws me on to, Dan, a great conversation we can have about where people are looking for these sort of answers or looking for help. So I remember when I first moved to London for the first time, right? And it was a complete culture shock to see Class A drugs like cocaine, lines, etc., so open, so completely open, especially in pubs or with whatever. So that makes me think that actually a lot of people do hide it, right? A lot of people are doing it. And I remember thinking that it wasn't such a taboo right, as well in open spaces, real,
Mm,
real sort of crazy stuff. And then also the knock-on effects that can go with it. So, Dan, I guess this is a great chance for you, right? I reckon that most people don't, if they've got a problem, I reckon most people don't speak to their friends or family. This isn't something you can speak to. I reckon lots of them do search for this on, using AI, X, Instagram gurus or whatever it might be. What's your take? This must be a fantastic area for hooks and for places to explore online.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think people aren't going to be like scrolling LinkedIn thinking, I'm hoping someone can help me solve my drug addiction. They're not going to be doing that. They're going to be searching for it if they're doing anything. So what I would do is make sure that in your bio, you've got something like, I worked for 20 years in addiction rehab, something like that. So just so that you've got the keyword there, so
mm,
that when your content is doing well, maybe it's not all about drugs and addiction and stuff like that.
no,
Uh, but people will be searching for it and then you will come up because obviously you've got that in your bio. That could be like a good middle ground for attracting people that you could help in the drug addiction space and also not kind of being too niche, if that makes sense,
yeah,
on like LinkedIn and stuff like
totally,
that. Yeah,
totally.
because otherwise you're not really going to find many drug addicts scrolling LinkedIn,
No.
I would
And it's
say.
it's not necessarily that you need to be addicted to it. It's just when you start to see that sort of grey area when things are starting to crop up, where you are becoming more reliant on it or to be able to socialize. You have to use it. This is the thought pattern in your head. So it's not just a dependency, it's that sort of grey area as well, that binge drinking or that binge using or whatever it may be as well. So it's not just a
Mm,
dependency because that's I think when things can really get out of control
yeah.
is when people become physically addicted to things.
Wow. There's so many ways that we can go with this, and so many ways I can link you guys together. I would say that hooks and triggers are probably quite similar, and some of them probably maybe not as obvious as you think. I think money would be a massive one when it comes to drugs, cocaine, and Dan. We see lots of people preaching about money on X or whatever it might be. The anxiety that goes with it, trying to manage, work, trying to hide it from, friends and family, all those sort of things. I just would imagine that it just seems more X to me, Dan, than it does LinkedIn. What's your thoughts? And Maria, I'd love to know your spin on this. Where do you think, well, okay, so where do you think most people go for this information? So my wife, for example, self-diagnoses herself all the time on GCP every day, right? And I read something the other day: 37% of people self-diagnose them. People, but I imagine something like this. That's quite scary. Actually, I'd imagine probably the worst thing you can do with something that's that high level to use AI, right? Because actually, it was in the news this week looking for some real clickbait for a suicide sort of convincing someone to take their own life. So it makes you think that actually AI and with addiction levels has to be real dangerous territory, right? But this is a great chat. So Maria, I'd say let's start with you. Where do you think most people go for this information, and what are the triggers? What's the links there that most people are looking to get answered?
Great question. I think that people avoid professional help for the stigma that is still attached to it all. I also think that people do use chat GPT, which scares the life out of me because you're not getting the human side. You're getting obviously the computer. And yes, it's good for some stuff, but when it comes to things like that, that could be dangerous in terms of the advice that is given back out by ChatGPT. I actually might run an experiment on it myself just to see what sort of comes up with it, with triggers and that. But like I say, what I find is the higher people climb, the harder it is for them to find somebody to speak to. And equally, it's quite hard. There is different organizations out there that are well established, but there's quite a lot of people that I speak with don't engage with them as well as they feel that they should. They find it difficult to get the concept of it, and they also find it difficult to hear what others are going through whenever they are going through similar stuff themselves. So, yeah, in terms of Chat GPT, it does scare the absolute life out of me when it comes to things like this. And I think this is why I do what I do. So, because I've also set up like a holistic health reset program, and that's for what going into organizations holistically looking at in a group setting, and that's working through the whole spectrum of sort of mental wealth, if you like. I'm in the process of renaming that. But in terms of so that it's not me coming in and saying you have an issue, it's more being an education side, and then people knowing that I'm there, it gives them then that sort of confidence in moving forward, and that there is help. But an interesting thing that I also find, which might be interesting for your listeners, but it's also the fact that when people give up alcohol, now more so than the cocaine or the rest of the drugs that come behind that, but when people start to give up alcohol, they start to fret about what is it that they can say to people and a reason why they're not drinking. This is a big thing. This is massive. And, sometimes come up with excuses. So they would start with excuses. I'm on antibiotics or I'm driving tonight. They just don't feel that they're actually able to say, in this culture, they do not feel that they're able to say, I don't drink or I have a problem with alcohol. And that's not a nice place for society to be, that we actually put that much pressure on people to drink. And, it's very similar to what you were saying earlier, where you are, it's actually cheaper to buy alcohol than it is to buy a coffee. So there's so many different, like you said, there's so many different avenues that you can go with this. And it is just figuring out the best path for yourself. So everybody's triggers are different. It's how people sort of react to situations as well. So we start to look at that. And we pull all that apart, and look at thought processes and all the rest. So it's understanding sort of stressors and emotional triggers as well. And sometimes you almost find that, like anything in life, some people know some of their triggers, but they're not aware of all of their triggers. So they could be walking down the street someday and it just hits them like a smack in the face and they're going, whoa. And they start to think about, oh, I wouldn't mind a wee drink, or I wouldn't mind a wee smoke, or wouldn't mind a line, or whatever their vice is at that point.
It's really interesting. I could talk about this all day. Dan, you're of a slightly
Yeah.
different generation to us, right? So, Marie, when we were younger, right, drinking was a part of our institution, not just at pubs and nightclubs. Completely different to what it is now. There's more pubs closed than ever before in the UK. Nightclubs are very different. I saw a really interesting stat this week on X, Dan. The alcohol industry, since the end of COVID lockdowns, not the start, the end, is lost 880 billion in total around the world, right? And they put that down to Gen Z and their habits, right? So I think,
Mm.
Dan, we've had this chat before, me and Dan, funny enough, actually, is that the younger generations, I don't think, are drinking as much, right? So, Marie, are they subsidizing that for other stuff, right? That's one question. And Marie, I suppose my question to you is, do you see it not being a Gen Z sort of problem, or is it? What's your take on that? Dan, I think that'd be a good part to start with you on this. We've had this chat before. I think younger generations view alcohol a little bit differently, don't they? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think these are really good conversations to have in your content. So there's so many ideas there that you were just saying, Marie, with like diagnosing yourself with ChatGPT. There's the shame of not drinking alcohol, like societally. Those are really good things to like call out in your hooks and stuff like that on LinkedIn, calling out the problems. And I think that's what you're doing really well at the moment. You're calling out the problems rather than trying to like solve them right there and then, which isn't a good idea for like this kind of coaching, because people aren't obviously going to be scrolling LinkedIn thinking, I really want to get my alcohol addiction solved or whatever, anything like that. You want them to kind of associate you with the solution to that problem. And when they search for that, you'll come up. And I think you're doing a really good job of that. I saw also the cohort that you've got. That's kind of like the perfect thing to do is call out the problem in the content and then solve it in the community or the cohort, anything like that. And that's what me and Greg have been doing recently, and it's been working quite well. So I think yeah, that's a really good thing that you're doing at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you for the feedback on that. So that's slightly different to the group work and things that I do in the one-to-one coaching that I do. So the 1% circle that you're talking about is the cohort. And this was an idea that was born and I ran with it and I didn't overthink it. And I literally just put it out there and it's working really well. So what that is, that's for people who are too busy to have time to do stuff. And well, I don't know about yous, but I'm like that as well. And I don't set time to the side for the tedious tasks like going through your inbox and emptying it or unsubscribing to things, small things that are taking up a lot of space in your head. We don't give enough time for that. So that 1% circle is exactly for that, is for them little tasks that you keep putting to the bottom of your pile, but they keep presenting every single day. So today we will be we meet every week, and that's for 90 minutes. So the first 10 minutes there is a structure to it. The first 10 minutes is like a check-in. Then we have like 40 minutes where it's mics are off, the videos are on. We have a check-in then, and then we have a learning bit. Well, this is what we've done. We've only ran one of the circles yet. So this is what we have done. And the last part was in terms of sort of education in and around, right, what way is this going to work for you? Giving a little bit more guidance of what you can do to um, execute the goals that you've set out to do. And then the motivation continues through the week with the group. So I'm finding that so far has been very, very good. I'm loving it. The people are so lovely. I'm very lucky the way I am, really blessed. Like my clients are all lovely. Like they're so, so nice. They really are. So yeah, so I'm running a few things just parallel to each other, if you like, Dan, I suppose. Keeping
Yeah.
myself busy.
So something like that for more on like the client focus thing would be great. So like it doesn't even have to be like a paid community. It can be free. That's what we've got with the school community at the moment, is just getting all of your target audience into one place, solving like the surface level problems that you can solve in just a community. Have like calls and stuff like that, like you're doing at the moment. And that can be great for funneling up into your one-to-one coaching, which is what we do. And it works really well. And I think that's something that differentiates a lot of the coaches that we see that quit and the ones that are still going, is have they got a community or not? It sounds really simple, but it's something that a lot of people aren't really utilizing at the moment. So yeah, sure, good idea.
Definitely. Thank you.
That's amazing. So remember, before we come to even speak about this, I said that the main aim of the podcast is to inspire, right? 90% of coaches quit or fail. The world is in a state at the moment where we need more coaches to have success, right? That is such a great point, right? Build a community. I love the fact that you coined it a cohort, and I love that name. And exactly what you said, Dan, is that the key to coaching's success this year? That I think that the money train out of coaching has changed a little bit, right? I think more than ever, people are going to want authenticity, and
Yeah.
that's passion or skill plus usefulness, right? The keys to income in 2026. It's amazing that, you've managed to do that, right? Even with something so small as, is hacks or, small improvements. I absolutely love that. So I think that's probably the real take home for any coaches today, isn't it? That are watching this actually is to build a community, right? A tribe, a flock, whatever you want to call it. That's the way to gauge. And ultimately, to give a lot of it away for free as well. I know that it might be paid or whatever it is, but because you love it, right? And that fits in with the passion or skill aspect. Right, Marie, I've got an interesting take for you. I'd love to know your thoughts and yours, Dan, on this, right? Dan's a different age to us. I went to Ibiza every year for 15 years, right? Same week, every year. Sounds so sad. Closing parties, right? So when I was younger, in my early 20s, it was nuts. 3, 4 days, complete bedlam, everything you can imagine, right? And Ibiza looked very different to me, right? Full of drugs, full of alcohol, full of every sin, whatever you want to call it, right? I now go with my wife, right? It's very different. We go every year, but I still go to some of the same spots. I still same things. And Ibiza looks different. It feels different. Dan, people your age group aren't doing what I was doing at that age. They're going out and not drinking, more interested in how they look, more interested in health and fitness, right? Stuff like that. It's obvious to me. It's obvious. Marie, have you seen this? Or is the work that you do in terms of, you know, addictions and substance abuse, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Or has it even more dangerous than that? Has it changed? Because this might be what I think about is that there's less alcohol, but I think there's more of other stuff, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure. It's a hunch. What's your thoughts? I mean, I guess the real question to you is, in terms of substance and abuse and addiction, is it evolving? Or is it still the same things? Right. I know that's quite a deep question,
No,
but what's your
it's
thought?
always evolving. It's always evolving. And from what I can see is the trend is that alcohol is becoming less prevalent than the drug scene. So it's about how do we educate people in a way that we're not pointing the finger, that we're there to say, listen, I'll walk alongside you with this. It doesn't have to get out of hand, because a lot of people obviously start dabbling. Start usually is the same sort of pattern where this is how they start, in terms of start drinking first and then they start onto the drugs after. And then that sort of dwindles down. And sometimes what you find is then the drink doesn't become an issue, then it more becomes other sort of drugs, especially if they are working long hours, if they need to keep themselves stimulated, if they need to keep themselves awake, or if they have sort of if they're trying to burn the candle at both ends. Um, and equally, sometimes then the drug use can be less obvious than the alcohol use. Um, so yes, things are changing and it is worrying. But in saying that, stats a few years ago was still showing that we would lose more people to alcohol use than we would to heroin. And that was simply in terms of the likes of, if you take into account drink drivers, or, the impact. Obviously, people are now driving on drugs as well too. But even the repercussions that any of this has on work. So you get a lot of people as presenteeism, where they're at work, but they're there physically, but they're not there mentally. And also, if organizations are willing to look at this, because sometimes when you speak to organizations, they're going, "Oh, we can't afford," or whatever. But can they afford for the majority of their work staff to be off on the sick? So what I would always say is, make time for your wellness before you're forced to make time for your illness, because it can cost the economy billions, absolutely billions, when we start looking at and we start looking under the hood, and we start looking at the deeper stuff of the drugs and alcohol, and what people are doing outside of work that can then have an impact in their work life. And it's about
Mm.
finding that happy medium balance, that work life balance for people. Um, and sometimes it's the opposite as well. You don't know what's going on for people at home. So their work could be a release for them for things that are going on at home. At the end of the day, we're all human. We all have stress and we all carry bits of anxiety or whatever it may be. But it's about tapping into that and dealing with it as best as you can deal with it. And the thing is, I think again, for you and I, Greg, the difference in our era compared to yours, Dan, it was never taught to us. It was never taught to us, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with your emotions? How do you deal with, like, finding out who you really are without substances? How do you say no to something? Even things as simple as, how do we breathe right? How do we regulate all that? These are things that are never really taught to us, or, well, and for me myself, was never a thing. And as for alcohol and drugs, that was never a thing that was on the agenda either when we were younger.
Yeah, it's a fascinating chat. Other theories as well. I reckon that alcohol is most probably like a gateway, if that makes sense, into other things. Addiction, gambling. I think there's an epidemic of that going on in the UK. Pornography, but it leads me on to something else as well. Marie, do you see this as just like a male problem, or is it? Or that's an interesting thing, right?
Good question.
I'll be honest, right? I never hear my wife talking about her friends have these sort of issues. And Dan, that's a good one for you. Is it, on X and every we look at, is this a male dominated area? I'd say I don't even want to say it. I'm too scared to say it. What's your thoughts, Dan?
I think Marie will know better than me. From my perspective, I think it is more male dominated. And sometimes having a female coach can actually be like an advantage for
Yeah,
males, because they find it hard to kind of open up to other males, if that makes sense. So that
it
could
does.
definitely be a big selling point for you, Marie, is kind of targeting those males. But what do you think?
Well, funny, that's my niche, is males over 40. And there's a few reasons for that. Is that, yes, that I find that it is predominantly male. However, I also find that it's the males that aren't asking for the help. So when I worked in sort of NHS and stuff, it was more the females were coming through. But there was so many, when the males came, they got so much out of it. And I think you're right in what you're saying, Dan, in terms of that femininity and the masculinity, and to join them two together, it helps. And thankfully, I get a lot of good feedback from the males that I work with that they feel that they can really open up to me, which is it's lovely to hear. They do find again. Don't know how to say this, but again, it's almost about that stigma that men have about opening up about how they really are. Now, I mean, really are. It's not just as in, well, how are you? Oh, I'm all right. I'm grand. No, but how are you really? Men really struggle with that. And that there's so much stigma. And my thoughts are on it is that, and it's not nice to just tar everyone with the same brush. However, I just feel that there's so much pressure on men to have broad shoulders and to take everything on board. I also find there's a fear of opening up to their partners because they don't want to burden their partners either. And it's something that really hits hard with me, I think. I think because most of the suicide rates, it's three quarters are males, which I think speaks volumes for itself. That's in the UK. That's the UK stats, which scares the absolutely life out of me. I have three daughters. So I think my drive in this is the fact that I would like my three daughters to have grow up in a world where men feel safe, that they can speak and they can speak out, and it's not to be stigmatized, but it's normal. You know, we all have mental health and mental wealth, so it's putting powering up your mental wealth battery is really my goal in all of this. And again, I come from a family of I have five brothers, so quite male dominated in terms of my own upbringing. So there's so much going on, and I think the pressures and the stress that men have even in work, and that's something that it's so fluid that it starts to interrupt their personal life. And what I also say is that there has been interruptions and unbalance in life and harmony at home, because the men are taking on so much at home as well. So it's there's just causing almost a river between families as well. And a lot of men that I work with are high flying, so they work away from home quite a lot. And one thing that would always stick to me is one of my clients had said how when he comes home, it's about him fitting in to his wife and his daughter's regime rather than them fitting in to his regime. So it's about creating that harmony. And also as well, again, the people that I work with are up in such a high pedestal in work. So whenever they come home, the normal life seems surreal. You know, like putting out the bins or cleaning up after the pets or whatever it may be. So it's about normalizing that because that transition between personal life and professional life can be very, very difficult also, I find for men. So I suppose, yeah, I'm hoping that answers your question there, really.
No, perfect.
Do you know what I think is interesting as well, actually, is that people, the men that we work with, Greg, like kind of review us and give us testimonials at a much lesser rate. And I think that's because they don't like knowing that, well, admitting that they've been helped,
Yes.
which is very interesting. What do you think, Greg?
That was one of the main reasons that why we made the book, by the way, is that
Yeah.
I feel that men still don't want to open up. However, that tide is changing a lot. You know, if you look back, so when I first started getting interested in the coaching space, let's say 10 years ago, it was predominantly women based, right? Predominantly women coaches, predominantly women who were taking the coaching. Very, very, very different now. And I think that that space is changing. Just before I ask one more question, one interesting part, even I was worried and scared about the stigma that would be applied to me from putting a male, stereotype on that, right? Toxic masculinity, all of the stuff that's related to that, Dan. Dan, we see that in abundance on X in particular, lots of interesting stuff. I do think things are getting better. I do think things will change in that space. I just think that there needs to be greater role models and the tide is changing. Interesting to see, Marie, what that's going to be like in terms of our space going into the future. Marie, I've got one last question for you. I think a real great take home today is the communities, right? You know, if you're a budding coach or building an online business, communities are key to 2026. But do you have any other questions for Dan? Anything that maybe you're not sure of, in any aspect of marketing or working online? Far away.
Let me think. So I suppose it's looking at strategy, isn't it? So what works best in an environment where people are hard to reach and where they're almost afraid to step up to the mark to say, I need help, because that's not a weakness. But again, if we start to look at the psyche of the male species, like I find it can be very difficult to reach into that market initially.
Yep.
I don't have no problem whenever I get talking to people, they feel more relaxed with me. But it's actually the strategy to tap in to that network initially, given the stuff that I do, because there is still so much stigma attached to it.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it starts with content for sure. So calling out the problems. So the conversations that we've had today would be great as content for you. So the clips that we send you, they're brilliant. You can post those because people are going to be kind of resonating with those and you're going to attract automatically those types of people. I think what people get stuck on is they get into like the 2023 mindset of like, I'm going to solve their issue and then they're going to become clients and it's going to be great. It doesn't really work like that anymore. You've got to have more like strategy behind it, more of a funnel. So once you've got that kind of content and you've got the couple of first people, that audience that resonate with it, it's kind of funneling them onto the community, like we said.
Mhm.
And when you've got all those people in one area, it's so easy to be able to turn them into clients and also help them as well. Even if they don't become clients, you're helping them at the end of the day. So it's kind of a win-win for both of you. So I think for sure it's calling out those problems, having the hard conversations almost and the controversial takes potentially to attract those people with your content and then funnel them into something more. Yeah.
I
Dan.
think it's also important to note, though, that it's not everything that I do and that people like us do in terms of the coaching world, and especially when it's to do with mental wealth, it's not all doom and gloom. People are almost afraid to get in touch because they think, oh, I'm going to have to give my life story out and I'm going to have to be like sitting there in tears or whatever their thought process is. It's not like
Mm,
that. Obviously, we deal with the serious stuff. But what I find is that there's like most of the people I would see on a one-to-one basis have a genuine smile on them before they leave my sessions.
mm.
So I think it's important to point that out in terms of mental health as well.
Yeah, it's like Greg said actually with the book. I think it's obviously anonymous. So people are having that problem. They're like, by the way, you can buy this book. They're like, okay, I can read this. I can actually get some value from this without having admitting to someone that this is my issue and that kind of thing. So that's a good solution to that, I think.
A good one. And help me out with this one. Make sure I keep this on the right track. We're working with a sobriety guy, and instead of going out and saying, "Look, stop drinking. It's not good for you," etc., etc., there has to be an art of storytelling to it, where someone relates to you. Right. So I've got a good example of something that worked for me and someone that reached out to me from a story that I put out there and what we told him. So it was a guy who had a great interest in football. We talked to him about actually like posting on X, whatever, about alcohol to football, whether it's going to games or famous players that have had, whatever. So there's that relation resonating space, right? So for me, I wrote a post. I went 176 days sober last year. I've had my own issues with alcohol. My wife, you can't script this. I said you can go wherever you want for our anniversary. She booked Ibiza, Playa Den Bossa, Calvin Harris, Ushuaia for our anniversary. And as a reminder, I've been 176 days sober. That was nuts. And I did drink one or two drinks. I didn't go crazy, but I posted it. I had people reach out to me talking about the anxiety of Christmas
Yeah.
events, about nights out, birthday parties, weddings, all of this sort of stuff, right? It's the art of storytelling, Dan, isn't it? And being honest with your own stories and about how you've worked for it. So, Marie, that would be my answer. Is I know you're working with men of a certain age group, but even that silly Ibiza story about how it's different, going on holidays, whatever it is. It's the art of the storytelling aspect. Dan, do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And if you haven't been through that problem, definitely talk about a client that you've helped who has. That can be a good thing to do. For us, like we always talk about, you can't walk someone down a path you haven't walked down yourself, um, or that you haven't walked someone else down before.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So that is a massive thing for sure.
I think the latter. I think when I start talking about my clients, the passion comes through, and you wouldn't stop me. Would be here for days, lads, talking about that sort of
Love it.
That's good.
Absolutely.
But you're absolutely right, and it is that's how you sort of captivate your audience is by that art of storytelling, and it's just that as in what happened next, and keeping that going with the story. So yeah, that's a lovely sort of take on what we were speaking about as well, and I think that is a key takeaway for people listening is when you are speaking about it is that actually, you do it with passion. You can't hide passion, but you do it with passion, but you do it as a story as well. And, like, honestly, I could sit and talk here for hours and days about this and even like sort of things that I've been through or witnessed or walked with people with, and even in my own life, which would be lovely. But again, that would be a whole different day.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Guys, I've absolutely loved our chat. So, Marie, the real question is just before we finish, if there's anyone out there struggling, they've got their own issues, substance, alcohol, where's the best place to find you?
Best place at the moment is LinkedIn to find me. My website is still under construction at the moment because I think what's happening is I'm prioritizing my clients, which to me I'm okay with. But I will plan to get that website up and running. And I'm just known under Marie Donnelly as most of it. The posting is on my personal page as opposed to my professional page, which is Optimistic Future. And again, that's something that I'm going to be setting up and rolling with is more posts on my professional site to be linking it in. So that's where you will get me.
Absolutely love it. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. And if you've been listening, I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to find out more about us, find us at our school community, the Coach Trap. And until next time, remember, whatever you do, don't fall into the Coach Trap.